I'm Bill Leipold, and welcome to this edition of Breakfast at the Barracks. Joining me is Karyn Malinowski, Director of the Equine Science Center at the New Jersey Agricultural Experiment Station at Rutgers, New Brunswick. Karyn, welcome.
Good morning, Bill.
You know, I am so jealous of you. You get to work with one of the most majestic animals, the horses. So can you talk a little bit about what your research and what the Equine Center does?
The Equine Science Center, Bill's mission is better horse care through research and education. So everything that my colleagues and I do is focused around horse health and well-being, which is extremely important. My personal research in the last decade has focused on aging.
All right.
And someone might ask, why is the study of older horses important? And there's several reasons. One is the equine population is getting older, just as the human population is. And we estimate now about 20% of horses in the United States are over the age of 20.
Wow.
So there's a lot of old-timers out there. Another reason is that horses in that age group are still actively engaged in activities, physical activities, reproductive activities. And so someone will say, well, can a 25-year-old mare still have a foal? The answer is yes.
Okay.
And so it's important for us to take care of those older animals. A third reason is that horses make a wonderful model for human medicine.
All right.
They are the only animals that sweat like we do and love to exercise like most of us do and that get old like we do.
Okay.
You know, I've always challenged other scientists that a laboratory rat at age 6 months isn't chronologically as old as a 30-year-old horse is, and so they do make a wonderful model for comparative studies looking at human medicine as well. And the last point is we don't know when horses get old.
Well, I was just going to ask that question. How do you know when a horse is old?
And so the Equine Science Center is coming back very soon with a new portion of our wonderful website called Equine Science for Kids, focused on teaching youth between the ages of 10 and 14 about the good scientific work of the center. But I'm bringing that up now, Bill, because Lord Nelson was a horse that I bought for the Rutgers Mounted Patrol in 1978. You can believe it, a long time ago.
Right.
He is 37 years old and still well and alive and well. And so what we're learning about taking care of older horses, I guess, is paying off, because Nelson certainly is proof of the fact that we know what we're talking about. And so at 37, he's coming back as the mascot for the youth component of our website.
Well, let's talk a little bit about aging in horses. You brought it up, and you said a magic number, or I heard a magic number, 20. So what is the life expectancy of a horse, and when does the horse, for all intents and purposes, get to midlife? What does that kind of look like?
It's usually around a 3-to-1 ratio. So Lord Nelson at 37 is over 100 years of age.
Okay.
So unlike dog years where there's 7-to-1, horses are about 3-to-1. So a 20-year-old horse is about 60. So definitely middle-aged.
All right.
Life expectancy right now is around 30.
Wow.
So Nelson at 37 is quite old.
Right, and one of those remarkable kind of animals.
Yes.
And a remarkable life, it sounds like. Let's talk a little bit about New Jersey and horses. I have the distinct privilege of living in Monmouth County around lots of horse farms. Can you explain to me New Jersey's kind of relationship with the horse and kind of what New Jersey means to the horse population?
Bill, it's a wonderful history, and New Jersey is the horsiest state in the nation. You know, colleagues asked me in 1978, why would you want to be an equine scientist in New Jersey? You know, from the big universities like Texas A&M and the Ohio State University. Why would you ever want to be in New Jersey? And I said, well, very truthfully, there are more horses per square mile in New Jersey than any other state, which is a fact. The state animal is the horse. We are the only state in the United States to recognize the horse with that distinction. And at that time, the Meadowlands Racetrack was opening in 1976, and the best harness racing in the world was in New Jersey.
Okay.
And I could go to any meeting anywhere in the state of New Jersey and be back home and sleep in my own bed every single night of the week. So it was a wonderful place to start a career for a budding equine scientist.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the stress, because I know you also do aging and stress in horses. I'm going to make a wild assumption that you talk about harness racing. I live near the Monmouth racetrack. Is racing really, you know, stressful to a horse, and kind of what do they deal with after racing is done?
It's a great question, Bill, and actually people say that the life of a racehorse is very stressful. And of course, you know, the life of any a top-level athlete who is transported around, who's sleeping in different hotels, that sort of thing, sure, you get to a point where life becomes stressful.
Right.
But the hardest part, Bill, that we have when we are at the exercise physiology lab running horses on the treadmill, which are all former racehorses, is getting them to stand still.
Okay.
They love their job. They love to exercise. The top-level equine athletes are just that. If they were in a cushy little television studio like we are today, they would be absolutely miserable.
Okay.
They love their work, and I'll tell you what, I take a lot better care of my racehorses than I take care of myself. So while certain parts of their life may be stressful, it's short-term.
Okay.
And it's certainly not a long-term. It's a wonderful life for them. They love it, and people have really gotten very serious now about giving them an opportunity for life after the racetrack.
All right.
And of course, the Equine Science Center has a great history in that collaboration, where we've found homes for probably 300 former harness racing horses in the last 30 years since we began the research program in the 70s.
Over the past few years, there have been lots of conversations in the news, especially around Derby time or especially around Belmont Stakes time, about drugs and horses, especially race horses. Is that a predominant in terms of horse owning, or I don't have a sense of what that's like?
Yeah, I mean, there will be bad apples in any sport, Bill. You know,
Right.
the cyclist, the baseball scandals right now. I mean, if we look at the Equine Science Center's 5 focus areas, horse health and well-being is number 1.
Right.
The horses and the environment are number 2. Land use issues are number 3. The 4th is the integrity of equine sport, of equestrian sport, any type of equestrian sport, because it's not just racing that has bad apples. And my colleague Ken McKeever, who is an exercise physiologist and a great cardiovascular scientist, has always said, we're not here just to help the police or the regulators come up with detection methods for illicit substances. I, as a scientist, want to find out what it does to the horse and the horse well-being.
Right.
So at the center, Bill, we're doing a lot of work helping the racing commissions around the world come up with detection of illicit substances, which some people will use. But most importantly, we're coming up with what does it do to the horse.
Okay.
And in a lot of cases, people may be using what we call in the equine industry black magic or snake oil that has no performance-enhancing effect on these animals at all, nor does it have a detrimental effect. So we're collecting, we have now in the last 20 years, a large battery of scientific data that talks about these types of substances, what works, what doesn't, what has negative effects, what has positive effects.
Great.
But, you know, we're really, because New Jersey is the horsiest state in the nation, the center is focusing on the area of the future of the industry. And right now, anyone who reads, if you live near Monmouth Park, you certainly know that the racing industry in New Jersey is coming under fire.
Yeah.
Monmouth Park is shortening its racing days to 51 days this summer as a trial for $1 million in purses a day. But horses are extremely important to New Jersey. You know, and you have some of the graphics, but for instance, there's 42,000 animals, equine animals in New Jersey. Wow. The industry, the value is $4 billion. The economic impact on an annual basis is $1.1 billion. That's not anything to sneeze at.
It's amazing.
And the racetracks contribute $502 million of that $1.1 billion. The racing-related interest on those farms that surround where you live, those beautiful horse farms that you see with mares and foals on all of that acreage, 960 facilities in Monmouth County on over 27,000 acres of agricultural working landscape. People are farming there.
Right.
They contribute another $250 million. So the racing industry is making up 3/4 of that $1.1 billion economic impact. But in the most densely populated state in the nation, the equine industry is preserving over 20% of agricultural acres, in that there are 176,000 acres involved in those 7,200 operations statewide, and we are keeping traditional agriculture in business with another 46,000 acres of non-horse owning farm acreage to produce the food and the bedding for those horses in the state of New Jersey. It's huge.
It is huge. It's not just a little bit. It has a tremendous impact on the state.
It's a quality of life issue. I think people from Essex County to Cape May County recognize that quality of life issue. And it's about, history, and it's also about the economics. And the pleasure sport, I know your niece is an equestrian, a young aspiring equestrian, that the pleasure horse industry will be impacted if the racing industry begins to go away, because all of the top shelf clinics like Patty Hogan's Equine Clinic, like the New Jersey Equine Clinic, the Mid-Atlantic Equine Clinic in Ringo's, their primary customers are racehorse owners. And so if racing went out of business, all of that infrastructure would start to crumble. So the center is the one that led the study in 2006 and 2007 that came up with all of these numbers that we're talking to you guys about today.
We're getting ready to wrap up, but before we wrap up, I want you to talk a little bit about your new projects that are going on at the Equine Center and kind of about the new website that's about ready to come up.
Yes, well, it's a part bill of the Equine Science Center website, and you do have the graphic of better horse care through research and education and that website, which is simply esc.rutgers.edu. But we're incorporating a bunch of media things. We have podcasts, webinars, virtual tours.
Great.
Virtual tours, and the Exercise Phys Lab will be one of our next projects, but something that we've been working on for over a half a year, something dear to my heart, is equine science for kids.
Okay.
And it will be a youth component of that website. Young people and old people who are young at heart can visit Lord Nelson as he takes youth through the website in 3 areas of our focus: horse health and nutrition, healthcare and nutrition, horses and the environment, and exercise physiology. And there will be interactive games that Nelson will take the young people through. His first job is a tour of the Rider's Lane Environmental Best Management Practices Horse Farm. He will actually be on, in animated form, eventually on a treadmill and in the Exercise Phys Lab, wearing his heart rate monitor and doing all the tests that we do. And he's just going to be having a lot of fun. He will have his own fan club. He will have a blog. And young people will be able to send their questions to Ask the Expert Lord Nelson. And he has his own email address. So we're really excited about this project.
I'm hoping I'm over 100 years old that I'm treated just as well as Lord Nelson. Well, that's all the time we have for today. I want to thank you for coming on the show. It's been great to have you. Joining me today is Gregory S. Jackson, Associate Professor of English at Rutgers, New Brunswick. Greg, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Let's get into this a little bit. Your research is really around the idea of religion and literature. So can you tell me how you kind of got interested in that area?
Well, mostly because I work on the Puritans early on, that I got interested in popular religion in the 19th and 20th century. I think, like most Americans, I grew up religious, or grew up in a household that was religious. Part of the family was more fundamentalist, and the other part was Calvinist. And so, as getting older, you sort of look back and you think, what are the intellectual threads behind this? What's the history behind this? Yeah.
As I read through kind of your bio and read through portions of your book and kind of chapters, I think there were some things that came to mind for me. I kind of got this picture of a small little boy sitting in church, kind of with the sermons informing him, kind of painting these pictures. Does that have any truth to that, or is that just one of those things that I kind of just pictured from your writing?
Well, no, it has some truth behind it, but I mean, I think that's also, a pretty a pretty big part of growing up in America. I mean, I think, you know, some 90% of people grew up in churches before the 1980s, or at least attended occasionally. Yes, I was the one in the back always in trouble.
Okay.
Yes.
One of the things I want to talk about is, you talk about, specifically in America, the Christian identity and kind of how it really influences kind of our imagery or our ideas. Explain to me how that kind of holds true in your book and kind of how you talk about it in the book.
Well, in the book, I talk a lot about fear, a lot about the images of hell. Anglo-American Protestantism really focused a lot on fear, on images of suffering, images of the afterlife. And so a big part of Christian pedagogy in this country is built around notions of heaven and hell. And it was mostly hell up until the Civil War. And after the Civil War, theology in this country largely started turning towards images of heaven, and downplaying hell.
Well, I guess my biggest vision of hell comes from Dante.
Yes.
In terms of the conversations. So how much do you think that had an influence in terms of the sermons that might have been there, or in kind of the conversations that happened with those sermons?
Well, yeah, it had an enormous influence. There's never been a culture of death like the medieval culture of death. The great plagues of the 14th century really made death and dying the focus of everybody's lives. So there were lots of pictorial images, there were lots of catechisms, tons of sermons, you know, incredible murals. And initially in this country, in the colonial period, that was all sort of pushed back. That was all considered to be Catholic. And largely because in this country we believe people were predestined for heaven or hell. There was nothing they could do. When that began to shift in the 18th century, then fear actually could play a part in getting people to salvation. You can't scare people if there's no way they can get to heaven. You can give them anxiety. But after salvation becomes universal in the 18th century, the Methodists bring it in, the Baptists bring it in, then fear becomes a really powerful instrument for getting people to church, getting people to live right.
Okay. Well, one of the things that you said was interesting, and I kind of want to backtrack to just for 1 second. You said after the Civil War, the conversations of image, or the idea of heaven, came into the concept in terms of writing. Can you talk a little bit about what was that switch and how did it change? Was it the end of the Civil War that inspired a different hope, or?
Yeah. It actually was the death toll in the Civil War. There were 500,000 people died in the Civil War, and at least another 2 million were badly wounded or psychologically damaged. And so the focus became on reunions after life. Novels suddenly started appearing like The Gates Ajar that talked about what heaven looked like. In fact, our loved ones were looking down on us continuously. And in fact, there's a scene in that novel in which Abraham Lincoln is lifted to heaven by angels, and in fact looks back down on a country that was trying to reunite. And Confederate soldiers in heaven ran up to him to embrace him. So you get lots of images like that. And theology then really turns away from the fear of death and dying and all of the suffering that hell evoked, and just focused on a kinder, gentler Christ. And in fact, Christ became Jesus in that period in a very real sense.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about angel imagery. One of the conversations we talked about was Dante's influence in terms of looking at hell. Where did angel imagery come from in terms of heaven in that whole conversation?
Well, I mean, angels are part of the ontological chain of being. So, I mean, angels have been around since the medieval period. They didn't play a real focus in American theology until the Catholics brought them back in the 1830s, and then the big Catholic migrations in the 1880s, 1890s. Before that, what America was really focused on were the angels of hell, the demons. And demonologies were huge in this country in the 18th and 19th century. And angels, weren't really a big part until after the Civil War, and then angels appear in all of the the tombstones, cemeteries.
Okay, let's go back to popping a little ahead, I guess I should say, popular religion in today in terms of literature. Okay. So what do you think today in terms of popular religion influences a lot of literature context or literature in terms of writings now?
Well, I think that the best-selling novels in this country are religious novels. Evangelical individuals are are primarily, principally, the largest populations of readers in this country. It's not intellectual crowds per se, but people who think that their faith is in some ways assisted by the process of narrative and imagining themselves in different as different characters or in different moral situations. And so there's lots of very, very conservative novels, The Left Behind. They're very radical. They're post-rapture novels. But then there's lots of novels that are focused more on what would Jesus do, novels that focus on just the everyday life that a young Christian person would encounter in high school and putting them in different moral situations.
Let's talk a little bit about what would Jesus do. I think you give an interesting perspective to what would Jesus do in terms of not just the catchphrase of today's popular religion, but kind of where it came from historically. So,
yeah. Well, what would Jesus do is part of that huge social gospel movement after the Civil War, in which an incredible amount of hope was sort of infused into changing the social. And the WWJD slogan first appears in His Steps by Charles Sheldon in 1896, and it just takes the country by storm. Everybody buys the novel. Everybody takes on the sort of role they're supposed to in the novel, and that is you're supposed to join the characters in asking in every single thing you do in a day, what would Jesus do were he I?
Okay.
So it has that sort of subjunctive mood to it, and people just embrace this. This book became a bestseller in Wilmington among black congregants, bestseller across the United States in Chicago, New York, and that movement's never died. It was still part of the liberal movement that the 20th century turned very conservative. Popular Christianity followed the Pentecostal movement, but the WWJD kept its kind of social gospel roots, and you see, WWJD now is sort of on all sides of the evangelical divide.
One of the things that you brought up interesting enough for me was the conversation of moving into the conversation of Jesus, where Jesus becomes more of a person, a place after the Civil War. And so it seems to me that Jesus was obviously central to what would Jesus do. Right. Can you talk about the evolution and kind of what brought Jesus in terms of that conversation?
Yeah, these are what this is what we call in theology and seminary debates as the Trinity arguments, and that was about what's the ontological nature of Jesus. I mean, is Jesus God on earth and he's God in a human body, or did he actually become human when he came to earth, or is it something in between? Did he become God at his baptism? And one of the things that happened after the Civil War is that the popular Christians Christians who sort of followed popular Christianity, they moved out of the churches and began interacting in interdenominational ways throughout their communities. They began to wonder, what is the use of Christ's suffering, all the horrible things that happened to him if he was a God? If he was a God when he was here, then there's no benefit in imitating him. You're never going to, in fact, you could then imagine encountering horrible things on the battlefields of the Civil War or in industry in New York City or anywhere on the farm. But if you could imagine that Christ was actually human, that he actually suffered everything we suffered in a very real way and still defeated, whatever temptations occurred, then you could imagine a role model that everybody could follow. And in fact, in the WWJD movement, it was the young Ronald Reagan who called Jesus a role model in that way.
Right.
And so Jesus became then, and you can imagine if you were following the WWJD movement, you were asking what would Jesus do if he were here, that you could imagine Christ being a very close interlocutor with you. He followed you, he was your friend, he counseled you throughout the day. Then this isn't the God that wore, the Messiah that wore white robes. This is Jesus, the impoverished man who gathered fishermen around him.
Well, one of the things I'm going to jump to is probably my perception of what your classroom might be like around discussions. Knowing that Rutgers comes from a very diverse student, kind of eclectic kind of group, can you give me kind of an overview of what a conversation might be like in class, knowing that our students are probably every spectrum when it comes to believing in spirituality and God and Jesus?
Yeah. Well, in the class, when I teach the religious novel or something, I try to teach both Protestant and Catholic, and we look at other kinds of religion as well. But the hard thing for students at Rutgers, the hard thing for students anywhere, is to sort of separate their own beliefs and their own feelings from a broader discussion, not to personalize what we're talking about. And that's not too hard at Rutgers. Was a lot more difficult at other places I've been. At Rutgers, people are willing to sort of say, I can intellectually engage this. It doesn't change who I am. And that's really how we look at it in the class. We're just there to look at sort of the historical and cultural moments and movements of various denominations or Catholicism or Islam or...
So I'm interested to know, because I think we're in a society right now where Muslim and the conversation of Judaism and the conversation of Christianity all come into different conflict. Pay attention to CNN, conversations on MSNBC. Rutgers has a diverse student population, so can you give me a perspective of students who are non-Christian kind of reading the conversations around Christianity and Jesus specifically in your class?
Yeah, I think that students who have a Muslim background and actually students, Jewish students, have an easy time, both have an easy time understanding 17th, 18th century Protestantism. It's a very vibrant culture. It's a very exacting God. And in lots of ways, American Protestantism is based on the Old Testament, not the New. It follows the Old Testament. And in fact, it's sort of students in my classes that might identify themselves as evangelical that have the hardest time understanding 18th century Christianity. The thing I hear all the time is we read Jonathan Edwards and they insist that he just couldn't have known his Bible very well. Whereas students from other faith backgrounds can recognize that culture shifts, religion shifts.
Great. Well, we're getting to the end of our interview. I really wanted to thank you for being here. But before we go, I want to make sure that our viewers have a chance to kind of see your book. So what we want our viewers to do is kind of go on and look at The Word and Its Witness, The Spiritualization of American Realism by Gregory S. Jackson. You can find it on Rutgers Press, anyplace else?
Yeah, I mean, Amazon.com.
All right, Amazon.com. So we want to be able to do that. Thanks again. That's all the time we have for this edition of Breakfast at the Barracks. For more information about any of the subjects we've discussed here today, please visit our website at rutgers.tv. For all of us at the Rutgers Division of Continuing Studies, I'm Bill Leipold, and thanks for watching.